Wow, this episode was, long. Not that this is a bad thing, it's just episodes 1 to 3 were relatively smaller. It's been a while since my brain has had to digest loads of new information for this show, and this episode gave me a lot of hours just thinking about what I had just witnessed. The series is getting more and more tense, and I guess the breaking point will be in episode 8 or 9, but it's getting so aching to burst that I wouldn't be surprised if something extremely major were to happen next week. There are oodles and strudels to discuss in this week's episode, so let's dive into the deep end of this week's episode of Game of Thrones and see if there are any used condoms at the bottom of the pool.
Are you sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin.
Irritatingly, we didn't find out what Jon intended to do south of the wall straight away because his half-sister, her bodyguard, and that guy who has had nothing to do or say for a season and a half now show up at the gates. I would hazard a guess that Brienne's going to find out about her sword being capable of destroying White Walkers pretty soon and will stay and fight the unstoppable tide of ice zombies to come. I have to say, just as a passing comment though, Brienne and Tormund's internal monologues are obvious as shit. I think I'm in love. Watch it. All these jokes aside, the bit with Sansa and Jon reuniting was just beautiful. The music played a big part here, but these two haven't been with any of their family members for a long time. There's this connection that was lost between the Starks after the Red Wedding that I think is somewhat rekindled in this moment, and it's just fantastic. I also really liked this conversation between Jon and Sansa over soup, just purely because of how much emotion Kit Harington puts into it. It's so strange seeing as how stagnant he normally is, and now a member of his family shows up on his doorstep, he has this fiery passion brewing within him. Oh my god. Azor Ahai confirmed! All aboard the hype train! Speaking of hype, holy fucking shit, Brienne gave Melisandre a verbal bitch slap, didn't she? She delivered her dialogue so well in this scene, it's like the violence within her comes out in the way she speaks. I'm very happy this didn't get violent, the intensity alone had me on the edge of my seat for what could potentially happen. The framing of the scene makes Melisandre look so tiny and frail, completely different to what she's normally shown to be. This blood magic casting, death reversing priestess who we know so little about and yet has had such a profound effect on the storyline is just reduced to mere fragments, seen in her facial expressions and just how small she looks compared to Brienne. Things are getting very interesting indeed. Up at the Eyrie, General Asquith, Jon Royce, gets kicked around a bit by Baelish. This awkward power balance that goes on here is mildly interesting, but of course the most interesting part concerns the phrase that Baelish suggests an alliance with. His plan is getting more complicated and interesting every time we see him, and like I said in my review of episode 2, I would love to see a return of the phrase, so my calls have probably been answered, I guess. Tyrion finally begins tackling the problem of slavery relatively slowly, and the show repeats the joke that Tyrion still isn't very good at speaking the local tongue. It's interesting that he's now actually doing some ruling, but it's certainly not as interesting as when he was Hand of the King in Series 2. Mott and Jeff return with their irritating banter, and then Jorah goes on to explain information that we already know about before establishing a plan of action and reminding everybody that he's gonna die soon. You don't need to point this all out to us again. I know episode 1 was like 3 weeks ago, but if your audience are able to keep up with multiple simultaneous plot lines, I think it's unlikely they would forget something like that. So after infiltrating the city, which quite frankly looks like a nightclub at 1 o'clock in the morning, the pair get into a rather intense fight with some Dothraki. As much as I would love Jorah to just move on with his life, or what little remains of it, I did feel rather sad seeing him being beaten to a pulp and strangled. I found it quite interesting that before, Daario said he wished he'd been born a Dothraki, and his physical abilities certainly prove this, but his intelligence is certainly very human in that he spontaneously decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone by mashing a dude's head in. He is a really cool character, it's just a shame he's stuck with Jorah in this boring, banterous pathway they lead. Fortunately, of course, that little subplot ends after the ending of this episode, but I'll get round to that later in the video. Daenerys decides to leave the old people's home with her new best friend before meeting Jorah and Daario on the way to piss. How on earth is her hair always on point in this show though? Every goddamn time she goes through hell, she still looks fantastic. Babe, what is your secret?
Shame. 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 Shame.
I only noticed this the other day, but Margaery has literally never been able to uphold a stable relationship with anybody, has she? Let's face it, Renly's dead, Joffrey's dead, and now Tommen is unable to be with her due to Loras's homosexuality. She's gone from a life at the peak of luxury to absolutely nothing, just because she told a lie. The High Sparrow tells a story that will probably have some relevance later on, and we see Loras for the first time this series looking uncannily like Theon after he became Reek. He's not quite as bad, but he's certainly just as pathetic. Had Loras been in Margaery's shoes, I guarantee he would have performed the atonement by now and convinced Margaery to do the same. More awkward comedy comes along in this scene with Tommen before we get more emotional dialogue from Cersei that basically means, let me sort it out mate, you're too small. Which is exactly what she does in the next scene. This semi-meeting of the small council demonstrates best this crumbling of parliament within the city. I can't help but feel that Jaime and Cersei's dialogue was written for children though, and it's irritating to listen to, but that may be precisely the point of it. It's sad how easily the older two were swayed into making this decision with guilt-tripping and you will do this, you will do that kind of attitudes. Just to clarify, these are very minor complaints, in that this scene has also brought this tension of something big happening between the Faith and the Crown to an even bigger peak than before. I just wish it'd hurry up. I'm losing sleep thinking about what on earth might happen. I'm predicting that it'll be more of a negative outcome than a positive one, considering Lady Olenna's last words in the scene, better them than us. The section in Pike was kept unfortunately short, but it is still worth talking about.
Yeah, but it's not though, because there's not any relatable characters in it.
What on God's earth are you talking about? Theon's been with us since season 1.
Yeah, but he's just your usual typical white male, and
he hasn't got a cock. Are you being transphobic?
No.
Right. Good. Now fuck off back to Tumblr. Anyway, the King's Moot sounds like quite the task ahead, considering Yara straight away accused him of trying to steal the Iron Islands from her. It was quite a touching moment, but it really hit home when she brought up the botched rescue from Series 4. There's the inner conflict within Theon that's quite interesting. On the one hand, he's asked to be like an Ironborn, strong and confident with a heart of stone, whereas his years in servitude at Winterfell and his imprisonment as Reek has shaped his character to that of something completely different to what his family wants him to be. Then came Osha. Oh, poor Osha. Like I said before, not one of my favourites, but it was relatively sad to see her go. It's interesting, however, that we know her intentions as soon as Ramsay puts the knife down in this shot here. I think this scene plays out a bit like George R.R. Martin's loathing of predictability. I mean, I for one didn't see her death coming this quickly, but it would have been all too easy if Osha did kill Ramsay there and then. After he kills her though, there's just this fantastically sickening face of disregard that Euan Rion pulls as he continues to eat his apple. What a fucking savage. He is literally the new Joffrey. The difference being that he's his own master, and he's now got nobody commanding him and can do very much whatever he damn well pleases. We have more inner monologues from Tormund and Brienne. I really like how the tension begins to rise just as the letter is opened. The music or weird tones we hear indicate that the characters already know what kind of filth is going to be contained within it, but are also the same tones that are heard as Osha was killed. There are now so many potential battles and confrontations that are bubbling to the surface now that I really would love to know how they're going to fit it all in. We have Jon and his friends going to Winterfell, the Faith versus the Crown, the uprising in Dawn, and without even mentioning the ever-looming presence of the White Walkers, I just hope they don't throw it all away like the majority of big events that happened in Season 5. Now, this final scene could have been an absolute blast. And indeed, aesthetically it was. It's paced really well, and the blokes all sitting around making jokes as opposed to actually taking charge shows how much of a sorry state the Dothraki are left in after the departure of Khal Drogo. Daenerys knows this and uses it to her advantage. That's why she isn't just straight up thrown to the ground, raped and pillaged in the good old Dothraki fashion. There's nothing technically wrong with it, but there's just a few irritations that I have to get off my chest. Firstly, I find it rather convenient and somewhat confusing that the fire on the floor spreads so damn quickly. This is a big room and I highly doubt it would be carpeted or anything. If there was oil or some kind of fuel on the floor, who put it there and when? Also, I find this segment rather uninspired as well, considering this is almost exactly the same thing that happened at the end of Season 1, minus the baby dragons of course. But gaining a horde of Dothraki and her most faithful knight bending the knee again, just seems really unoriginal. I know there's the whole thing with Quaithe, moving forward requires moving back and all that, so I hope that there is a specific reason why obtaining the Dothraki will be advantageous to her in some way. Oh yeah, one more little thing before I leave you to the outtakes. I thought there weren't going to be any more nudes of Emilia Clarke. I thought she wanted to be known as an actress and not for her breasts. Maybe the producers increased their pay or something fishy like that. So, did it suck? The episode has given me so much to write about compared to the last reviews. I mean, not much actually happened, but the episode's length was slightly longer than usual and was a very interesting watch as always. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. I now present to you some cock-ups of many varieties whilst recording this video. Farewell! What the fuck was that? Who we know so little about and yet has had such a I know episode 1 was like 3 weeks ago, but if your audience are unable to keep up with... No, they're not they're anal, that's it. Had Loras been in Marjorie's shoes, I guarantee he would have performed the... No, not he. Yes, it is he. I can't read. Let's face it, Renly's dead, Joffrey's dead, and now Tommen is unable to do anything because he is pathetic, and I just cocked up my line again. She has gone from a no, that was fucking shit. Now he's got nobody commanding him, that was really badly delivered. I find it quite interesting that before Daario said he wished he was born a human Dothraki, and whatever the fuck I just said, I don't know.